The silence in the Vance estate wasn't the peaceful kind. It was heavy, clinical, and smelled faintly of lavender floor wax and the metallic tang of unswallowed medicine. Gina Vance sat by the floor-to-ceiling window of her library in Buckhead, Atlanta. At 62, she was still a striking woman, her skin the color of deep mahogany, her silver hair cropped in a regal, precise cut. But her eyes, once the terror of dishonest litigators across the state of Georgia, were clouded, not by age, but by a chemical fog she couldn't seem to shake. She looked at her hands. They were steady, yet they felt like they belonged to a stranger. On the mahogany desk sat a small plastic cup with 2 pills, a blue one for anxiety and a white one for cognitive support. "Time for your meds, Gina." The voice was smooth, like expensive bourbon poured over sharp ice. Sterling Vance stepped into the light. At 45, he was in his prime, fit, tailored in a charcoal suit, his smile never quite reaching his predatory eyes. Gina didn't look up. "I feel heavy, Sterling, my head. I can't remember where I put my journals from the 2018 session." Sterling moved behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. His grip was just a fraction too tight. "That's the dementia, sweetheart. Dr. Holloway warned us. The journals? You haven't kept journals in years, Gina. You're confused again." "I have," she whispered, a spark of the old Judge Vance flickering in her chest. "I remember writing in them last Tuesday." Sterling sighed, a sound of practiced exhaustion. "Last Tuesday you spent the afternoon staring at a blank wall, Gina. It's okay. I'm here. I'm taking care of everything. The firm, the estate, the girls. The girls." The mention of Sophie and Ruby was like a serrated blade through the fog. "Where are they, Sterling? It's been months. You said they were at the summer camp in the Cascades." "They are?" he lied effortlessly, stepping around to hand her the water glass. "And they're happy. They don't need to see you like this, Gina. Not while you're unstable." The court agreed. "Remember? You signed the papers." Gina looked at the glass. She remembered the courtroom 2 years ago. She remembered the humiliation of sitting in the very building where she had presided for decades, listening to a psychiatrist claim she was a danger to her children. She remembered Sterling's tearful testimony about her erratic outbursts and alcoholic lapses. She hadn't had a drink in 20 years, but the blood tests, mysteriously, had said otherwise. "Drink," Sterling commanded softly. She drank. She always drank. Because when she didn't, the episodes got worse, or so he told her. 7 days later, Gina was jolted awake not by a nightmare, but by the vibration of a phone she had hidden beneath the lining of her mattress, an old burner she'd managed to keep secret from the nurse Sterling hired to watch her. The sun hadn't yet pierced the Atlanta skyline. The clock read 6:47 a.m. The number on the screen was a 206 area code. Seattle. "Hello?" Gina's voice was raspy, unused. "Is this Gina Vance, the mother of Sophie Vance?" The voice was urgent, female, professional. "Hey," Gina sat up, the fog in her brain screaming against the sudden adrenaline. "This is she. Who is this?" "I'm Dr. Sarah Whitman from Seattle Children's Hospital. I'm calling because Sophie has been admitted to our PICU. We have an emergency medical situation, and as her biological mother, we need you here immediately for testing." Gina felt the world tilt. "Admitted? Sterling told me she was at camp. What's wrong with my daughter?" "She has acute myeloid leukemia, Ms. Vance. Her white cell count is critical. She's undergoing a crisis. Mr. Vance is here, but he isn't a match for the bone marrow transplant she needs. We need to screen you immediately." Sterling isn't a match. The words echoed in Gina's mind. Parents were usually a half match, at least. But the medical urgency overshadowed the logic for a moment. "I'll be there," Gina said, her voice transforming. The slur was gone. The hesitation vanished. The matriarch was back. "I'll be in Seattle by noon." Gina didn't call a car service. Sterling would track it. She dressed in a dark tracksuit, grabbed her emergency cash hidden in a hollowed-out legal tome, and slipped out through the servants' entrance she used to use when she was a young lawyer sneaking out to work late. She took a taxi to the airport, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every siren she heard she assumed was Sterling. Every man in a suit looked like his private security. He lied, she thought, staring out at the rain-slicked Atlanta streets. He told me she was happy. He told me she was safe. My baby is dying in a hospital 3,000 miles away, and he let it happen. The fog was lifting. For the first time in 2 years, Gina hadn't taken the white pill this morning. Her head ached, a blinding, sharp pain, but beneath the pain was clarity, cold, hard clarity. Seattle Children's Hospital was a fortress of glass and colorful murals that felt like a mockery of the grief inside. Gina walked through the doors at 2:15 p.m. She looked like a traveler, but she walked like a queen. She approached the oncology desk. "Gina Vance, I'm here for Sophie Vance. Dr. Whitman is expecting me." Minutes later, a tall woman with tired eyes and a white coat approached. Dr. Whitman looked at Gina, surprised by the intensity of the woman before her. Sterling had described Gina as a frail, demented woman in assisted care. "Ms. Vance, thank you for coming. Where is she?" "She's stable for the moment, but she's weak. The leukemia has been progressing for months, Ms. Vance. Didn't your husband mention the symptoms? The bruising? The fatigue?" Gina's jaw tightened until it hurt. "My husband mentioned nothing. Tell me about the transplant." "We tested Sterling. He's a zero match. It's unusual for a biological father, but genetics can be complex. We need to test you, and we need to test her twin, Ruby." "Ruby is here?" "Yes, in the waiting room with the nanny." "Take my blood," Gina said, rolling up her sleeve. "Take whatever you need. But after that, I'm going to see my daughter. And if Sterling Vance tries to stop me, he'll find out why they used to call me the Iron Gavel of Fulton County." The PICU room was quiet, save for the rhythmic hiss-click of the ventilator and the steady beep of the heart monitor. Sophie looked so small. Her beautiful dark skin had turned a grayish ash. Her curls, which Gina used to braid for hours, were thin. Gina fell to her knees by the bed, taking the girl's hand. It was ice cold. "I'm here, Sophie. Mommy's here." "Gina?" The voice was a snarl. Sterling stood in the doorway. He looked disheveled, his first chink in the armor, but his eyes were full of a new kind of terror. Not grief, fear. "You shouldn't be here," Sterling hissed, stepping into the room and closing the door. "You're violating a court order, Gina. You're mentally incompetent. I'll have the police remove you in handcuffs." Gina stood up slowly. She was 2 inches shorter than him, but in that moment she towered over him. "Our daughter is dying, Sterling. You lied about the camp. You lied about her health. You let her wither away while you played house in Atlanta." "I was protecting her." Sterling raised his hand as if to silence her. "Protecting them both from you. Look at you, you're shaking. You're having an episode." "The only episode I'm having, Sterling, is the realization of what a pathetic, small man you are." Gina stepped into his space, her voice a low, vibrating hum of power. "I am here under medical emergency law. Dr. Whitman called me. My rights as a biological mother to provide life-saving care supersede your fraudulent custody order. If you touch me, I will scream so loud the board of directors will hear it. And then I will sue this hospital, and you, until there isn't a cent left of the Vance name." Sterling recoiled. He didn't recognize this woman. The demented Gina was gone. "Fine," he spat, regaining his composure. "Test yourself. You won't be a match anyway. You're too old, too sick. Your blood is as rotten as your mind." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "And don't even think about Ruby. She's mine. I've already told the doctor she isn't to be touched. I won't have both my daughters butchered for your vanity." Gina watched him leave, her heart hammering. Sterling isn't a match. Ruby isn't to be touched. She looked at her daughter on the bed. Something didn't sit right. As a judge, Gina had learned to listen to the things people didn't say. Sterling wasn't acting like a grieving father. He was acting like a man whose bank vault had been left wide open. 5 hours later, Gina was sitting in the dark cafeteria when a shadow fell over her table. "Gina, is that really you?" Gina looked up. Her breath hitched. Dr. Eris Thorne. He was older now, his hair a salt and pepper crown, but the kind eyes were the same. Eris, the man she should have married. The man she had turned away from 11 years ago when she chose to try and save her marriage to Sterling. One night of weakness, one night of seeking comfort in his arms before she went back to her duty. "Eris," she whispered. "I saw the name on the lab work." Eris sat down, his face etched with concern. "I'm the chief of hematology here, Gina. I'm overseeing Sophie's case." "Eris, tell me the truth. How bad is it?" Eris hesitated. He looked around to ensure they were alone. "The leukemia is aggressive, but that's not why I'm here, Gina. I ran the HLA markers myself. I saw Sterling's results." Gina leaned in. Dr. Whitman said it was unusual that he was a zero match. Eris took a deep breath. "Gina, unusual is a polite word for impossible. A biological father must share 50% of the markers. Sterling Vance shares 0%. He is not Sophie's father." Gina felt a chill wash over her. I knew. I suspected. That night, 11 years ago. Eris, Sophie must be yours." Eris nodded slowly, a tear glinting in his eye. "I suspected it too, seeing her. But Gina, that's not the twist." "What do you mean?" "I ran the markers for Ruby too," Eris whispered, leaning closer. "I wasn't supposed to, but I had to know if I had 2 daughters. Gina, Ruby is Sterling's daughter, 50% match." The cafeteria went silent. The hum of the vending machines felt like a roar. "What are you saying, Eris?" "I'm saying you have twins with 2 different fathers. It's called superfecundation. It happens in 1 in a million cases. But here's the problem, Gina." Eris's voice turned cold as stone. "Sterling knows. He's known for years. And he's been keeping Ruby away from the testing for a reason. He's not trying to save Sophie, Gina. He's been using these girls to keep you in a cage. And now that Sophie is sick, he's terrified the secret will come out." Gina stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. The fog was gone. The pills were gone. "He took my life," Gina whispered, her eyes flashing with a terrifying ancient fire. "He took my children. He turned my own body into a lie." She looked at Eris. "Eris, hijack the lab. Run every test you can. I need to know what he's been doing to Ruby. Because if he's not a match for Sophie, and he's been hiding Ruby, he's not just a liar. He's a monster." "What are you going to do?" Eris asked. Gina Vance straightened her spine, the same way she did before delivering a life sentence. "I'm going to go to war." The hospital at 3 a.m. was a liminal space, a corridor of humming machines, the rhythmic squeak of a nurse's rubber-soled shoes, and the oppressive smell of antiseptic trying to mask the scent of human frailty. Gina Vance stood in the shadow of the vending machine area, her silver hair catching the flicker of a faulty fluorescent light. For 2 years, she had been told she was a ghost in her own life. Sterling had convinced the world, and almost convinced her, that her mind was a fading map, its landmarks dissolving into the mists of early-onset dementia. But tonight, the fog was gone. The white pill she had palmed and flushed down the toilet back in Atlanta was the only thing that had been keeping her tethered to that ghost state. Now her mind was a razor. She moved toward room 412. This was the room where Ruby, the healthy twin, was being kept. Dr. Whitman had mentioned that Ruby was being held for precautionary observation, a phrase that, to Gina's judicial ears, sounded like a polite euphemism for custody. Gina slipped inside. The room was dark, save for the green glow of a pulse oximeter that wasn't even attached to the child. Ruby wasn't in the bed. Gina's heart skipped. She scanned the shadows. There in the corner, curled into a tight, defensive ball on the hard vinyl window seat, was her daughter. Ruby's knees were pulled to her chin, her arms wrapped around them so tightly her knuckles were white. "Ruby, baby, it's Mommy." The girl didn't move. She didn't even look up. She just squeezed her eyes shut tighter. "You're not real," the girl whispered, her voice a thin, brittle reed. "Dad says the medicine makes me see things. He says if I talk to the air, I have to go to the quiet room." Gina felt a surge of nausea. The quiet room. Sterling's vocabulary for isolation. "I am as real as the floor beneath you, Ruby," Gina said, kneeling on the cold linoleum. She reached out, her hand trembling. When she touched Ruby's shoulder, the girl didn't startle. She flinched. It was a practiced Pavlovian retraction of the body, the way a beaten dog reacts to a shadow. "You're so thin," Gina breathed, her eyes welling. She gently pulled Ruby into her lap. The 10-year-old felt like a bundle of dry parchment. There was no substance to her, no childhood softness. Her ribs were a ladder beneath her pajama top. "Let me see your arm, baby," Gina said, her voice dropping into the low, commanding tone she used to use with frightened witnesses. She rolled up the sleeve. In the dim light, the bruises were unmistakable. Finger marks, 3 on the inner bicep, 1 on the outer. A grip so violent it had burst the capillaries beneath the skin. And on her collarbone, a yellowing older mark, a handprint of neglect. "Why, Ruby? Why did he do this?" Ruby looked at the door, her eyes wide with a terror that no 10-year-old should possess. "He said I was excessive. He said I was eating Sophie's life. Every time I took a second piece of toast, he said it was $1 taken from Sophie's medicine. He told me if I got heavy, like you, I'd lose my mind too." Gina pulled her daughter closer, her mahogany skin pressed against Ruby's pale, translucent cheek. In that moment, the former Judge Gina Vance died. The matriarch was reborn, and she was thirsty for blood. Gina left Ruby sleeping, this time in the actual bed, tucked under 3 blankets. She walked with purpose to the hospital's 24-hour family resource center. She needed a computer. She needed a portal. Sterling was a brilliant litigator, but he was arrogant. He believed Gina was a broken machine. He had never changed his master passwords for their shared cloud, passwords that Gina had watched him type 1,000 times over breakfast while she pretended to read the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. She logged in. Her eyes scanned the folders. Vance Estate, firm accounts, Save Sophie Foundation. She opened the foundation folder. On the surface, it was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. A video of Sophie playing with a golden retriever. A photo of her in a hospital bed with a caption, "Help Sophie fight the big C." The total raised $4.2 million. Gina began to dig. She pulled up the disbursement ledgers. Northwest Specialty Consulting, $45,000 per month. Direct Logistics, Cayman, $120,000 transfer. Vance and Associates, $300,000 for legal guardianship oversight. Gina's fingers flew across the keyboard. She opened a private tab and searched the Washington State Medical Registry. Northwest Specialty Consulting. No record. She searched the business license for Direct Logistics Cayman. It was a shell company registered to an address in Georgetown that shared a P.O. box with 5 other Vance-controlled entities. "You're not saving her," Gina whispered to the empty room. "You're harvesting her." Sterling was laundering the donations. He was taking the money given by well-meaning strangers, thousands of people who thought they were buying Sophie a chance at life, and funneling it into his private offshore accounts. And Ruby? Ruby was the collateral damage. He was starving her to minimize household expenses and to create a narrative of a struggling, martyr-like single father. Then she found the most damning file of all, a deleted PDF in the temporary folder. It was a contract. The Morrison Hart Estate Agreement. Gina recognized the name. The Morrison Harts were an ultra-wealthy family in Seattle whose son had died 3 years ago. The agreement was a private placement. Sterling had agreed to let a private medical research group, another shell company, use Sophie's unique bone marrow data in exchange for a donation of $2 million. He wasn't just a thief. He was a broker. He was selling his daughter's genetic code to the highest bidder. By 9 a.m., the hospital was a hive of activity. Gina stood at the end of the PICU hallway, her back straight, her silver hair shimmering like a halo of cold fire. Sterling walked through the double doors, flanked by 2 men in dark suits, his private security. He was wearing a custom-tailored navy suit, looking every bit the grieving but stoic hero. "Gina," he said, his voice loud enough to attract the attention of the head nurse. "I was told you spent the night in the building. This is a violation of the peace treaty we established with Dr. Whitman. You are unstable. You are trespassing." He signaled to the security guards. "Gentlemen, please escort Ms. Vance to the parking lot. If she resists, call the police. I have the Georgia commitment papers in my briefcase." Gina didn't move. She didn't shout. She simply reached into her pocket and pulled out a stack of printed documents. "Let's talk about commitment, Sterling," Gina said, her voice projecting with the practiced resonance of a judge delivering a life sentence. "Let's talk about your commitment to Northwest Specialty Consulting, or perhaps your commitment to the $2 million you're receiving for selling our daughter's marrow data to the Morrison Hearts." Sterling stopped. The smirk on his face didn't vanish. It curdled. "You're having a delusion, Gina," he said, though his eyes were darting toward the nurse's station. "The dementia is progressing. Nurse, get her a sedative." "I don't think so." Dr. Eris Thorne stepped out of Sophie's room. He was holding a tablet. "I've spent the morning reviewing the Save Sophie disbursements Gina sent to my private encrypted email. I've also had the pediatric team conduct a full physical on Ruby." Eris stepped closer to Sterling, his face a mask of professional fury. "Ruby Vance has stage 2 malnutrition. She has bruising on her ribs that suggests blunt force trauma. And Sophie? Sophie has been denied second opinion consultations that were fully funded by the public because you were skimming the top, Sterling." "This is a conspiracy," Sterling shouted, his voice cracking. "I'm her father. I have sole legal custody." "Not for long," Gina said, stepping into Sterling's personal space. She was shorter than him, but in that moment she felt like a giant. "I've already contacted Eleanor Riggs in Atlanta. We're filing an emergency motion in King County Court this afternoon to stay your custody. We're citing imminent danger. And if you try to take Ruby out of this hospital, I will have the Seattle PD arrest you for child endangerment before you reach the elevator." Sterling lunged at her, his hand raised. "You think you can take them from me? You're a broken old woman. You're nothing." One of the hospital security guards, a large man who had been watching the exchange, stepped between them. "Hands off, sir, or you're the one leaving in cuffs." Sterling straightened his tie, his chest heaving. He looked at the gathered staff, the doctors, the nurses, who were now looking at him with undisguised loathing. "This isn't over," he hissed at Gina. "You have no idea what I've done to ensure these girls are mine. You think a few bank records will stop me? I built this family. I own it." He turned and stormed out, his security detail trailing behind him like beaten dogs. The transfusion happened at noon. Gina sat by Sophie's bed. The girl was conscious, though drowsy. Across the room, Eris Thorne sat in a recliner, a needle in his arm, his blood flowing into a collection bag. "She looks like you, Eris," Gina whispered, watching the dark, healthy blood of the man she loved enter the veins of her dying child. Eris looked at Sophie, then back at Gina. "She has your stubborn chin, Gina, and your heart." He paused, his expression turning grave. "Gina, I ran the tests you asked for, on the samples you found in the guest house last year." Gina's hand tightened on Sophie's rail. "And? The white pills Sterling was giving you? They weren't for dementia. They were a concentrated cocktail of benzodiazepines and a mild scopolamine derivative. It's a truth serum mix, but in low, constant doses, it creates a state of perpetual suggestibility and memory loss. He wasn't treating your dementia, Gina. He was manufacturing it." Gina closed her eyes. A single tear escaped. "He turned my own mind into a prison. There's more," Eris said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The records Eleanor sent from the pharmacy in Atlanta. The placebos for the birth control in 2015? He didn't just swap them once. He had a recurring order for 5 years. Gina, he didn't just want a family. He wanted to trap a Tam fan, judge. He knew about the Vance inheritance laws. He knew that as long as you were unfit and he had custody of the heirs, he was the king of the castle." Gina stood up. She walked to the window looking out at the gray Seattle skyline. The rain was starting to fall, a cold, relentless drizzle. "He thinks he's playing a game of chess," Gina said, her voice cold and hollow. "He thinks he's moved all the pieces. He thinks I'm the queen he's already captured." She turned to Eris, her eyes glowing with a terrifying judicial light. "But he forgot one thing. I know the law, and I know how to break it when it fails to protect the innocent. He's going to lose everything, Eris. His firm, his money, his freedom, and most of all, he's going to lose the name Vance." "What's the next move?" Eris asked. "Tomorrow," Gina said, "we go to court. And tomorrow the world finds out what happens when you try to bury a matriarch before she's dead. The morning of the emergency custody hearing in King County Family Court was gray, the kind of Seattle gray that feels like it's soaking into your bones. Gina Vance stood in front of the brass-framed mirror in the courthouse restroom. She was wearing a vintage midnight blue Chanel suit, the same one she wore the day she was sworn in as a judge. She looked at her reflection. The sunken eyes and trembling hands of the demented Gina were gone. In their place was a woman who had spent 30 years looking into the heart of darkness and calling it by its name. "You ready, Jenna?" Eleanor Riggs asked, stepping in. Eleanor was a legend in the Atlanta legal scene, a woman who moved through a courtroom like a shark through deep water. She was carrying a briefcase that contained enough fire to burn Sterling's world to ash. "I've been ready for 2 years, Eleanor," Gina said, her voice steady as a heartbeat. "I just didn't have the key to the handcuffs. Now I do." The courtroom was packed. Sterling had ensured the local press was there, hoping to turn the hearing into a final public humiliation for Gina. He sat at the defense table, looking impeccable in a bespoke Italian suit, whispering confidently to his high-priced attorney, David Miller. Judge Harold Bennett, a man known for his no-nonsense adherence to the letter of the law, took the bench. "We are here for the matter of Vance versus Vance," Judge Bennett announced. "A motion for emergency modification of custody based on allegations of imminent danger and fraud. Ms. Riggs, you have the floor." Eleanor stood. "Your Honor, for 2 years, my client, Gina Vance, has been a prisoner of a narrative constructed by the man sitting across from her. A narrative built on medical fraud, psychological torture, and a betrayal so deep it defies the imagination." "Objection!" David Miller shouted. "Inflammatory language. This is a custody hearing, not a soap opera." "Overruled," Judge Bennett said, his eyes fixed on Gina. "I've seen the preliminary medical reports on the children. I want to hear the evidence." Eleanor called Dr. Sarah Whitman and Dr. Eris Thorne to the stand. For 2 hours, the medical reality was laid bare. Dr. Whitman presented the bone density scans of Ruby, the evidence of a child who had been systematically denied basic nutrition. She showed the photos of the finger mark bruises. Then came the financial audit. Frank Bishop, the private investigator, presented the Save Sophie Fund records. He walked the court through the $285,000 in fake invoices and the wire transfers to the Cayman Islands. "Your Honor," Frank said, pointing to a slide on the screen. While Sterling Vance was telling the world he was a martyr for his dying daughter, he was using her cancer to fund a lifestyle of luxury and hide his assets from the wife he was slowly poisoning. The courtroom was silent. Even the reporters had stopped typing. Sterling sat frozen, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle in his cheek was twitching. "Your Honor," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal hum. "We now move to the matter of the children's origin. The defense has long claimed that Gina Vance is unstable and that Sterling is the only competent parent. But we have discovered that the very existence of these twins was a criminal act of entrapment." She handed a document to the bailiff. "This is a record of pharmacy purchases from 2015. At that time, Gina Vance was using a specific brand of hormonal birth control. We have testimony from a pharmacist in Atlanta, under oath, that Sterling Vance personally picked up those prescriptions every month." Gina watched Sterling. His face was turning a dull, sickly gray. "We also have a recovered hard drive from the Vance guest house," Eleanor continued. "It contained search history from May 2015. How to sabotage birth control pills, placebo pills that look like orthotricycline, and an Amazon receipt for 90 sugar pills designed to look identical to Gina's medication." A gasp erupted in the gallery. "Sterling Vance didn't want a family," Eleanor shouted. "He wanted a hostage. He knew Gina's family inheritance was tied to the production of heirs. He sabotaged her body, forced her into a high-risk pregnancy at age 51, and used those children to bind her to him while he bled her dry." "I'd like to call my client to the stand," Eleanor said. Gina walked to the witness box. She didn't look at the judge. She looked directly at Sterling. "Sterling," Gina said, her voice echoing in the rafters, "you told me I was losing my mind. You sat by my bed every night for 2 years and gave me those white pills. You told me you loved me while you were erasing me. Sterling stood up, ignoring his lawyer's hand on his arm. I saved you, Gina. You were a cold, career-obsessed woman who didn't know how to be a wife. I gave you a family. I gave you those girls. You didn't give me anything, Sterling, Gina said, her voice rising with the power of 30 years on the bench. You stole my health. You stole my career. And then you tried to steal my daughter's lives. You thought because I was over 60, I was a spent force. You thought I was a relic you could put in a box and forget. She leaned forward. But a matriarch doesn't forget, and she certainly doesn't forgive a man who starves her child. There is one more thing, Your Honor, Eleanor said. We received an anonymous file last night. It appears to be a recording from a security camera in a private club in downtown Atlanta, dated 6 months ago. The lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life. It was a graining, high-angle shot of a booth. Sterling was sitting across from a man in a leather jacket, a man the FBI would later identify as a known fixer for organized crime. Sterling's voice. She's starting to ask questions about the trust. The medication isn't keeping her down like it used to. I need the permanent solution we discussed. The fixer. That's a big jump, Sterling. From drugging her to... The permanent solution? Sterling. She's worth $40 million in insurance and estate holdings. If she dies while I have sole custody of the kids, the board can't touch me. Just do it. Make it look like a fall. She's demented, remember? Who's going to question a confused old woman falling down the stairs? The video cut to black. The silence that followed was absolute. Then the sound of handcuffs clicking. 2 FBI agents, who had been waiting in the back of the room, stepped forward. Sterling Vance, the lead agent said, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Judge Bennett didn't even wait for a closing argument. In my 30 years on the bench, the judge said, his voice shaking with indignation, I have never seen a more calculated display of sociopathic cruelty. Mr. Vance, you are a disgrace to the bar and to the human race. He slammed his gavel. Order of the court. Emergency custody is granted to Gina Vance. Sterling Vance is to be remanded without bail. All assets associated with the Vance name are frozen pending a full criminal audit. And Mr. Vance, may God have mercy on your soul, because this court will not. Sterling was led out in chains, screaming about his rights. Gina didn't watch him leave. She was looking at Sophie and Ruby, who were being led into the courtroom by Eris Thorne. 6 months later, the Vance estate in Atlanta was no longer a tomb. The windows were open, letting in the scent of blooming magnolias and the sound of children laughing. Sophie was in full remission. The bone marrow from Eris had been a perfect match, a miracle of science and a secret kept for a decade. She was back in school, her dark curls growing back thicker than ever. Ruby had gained 15 pounds. She no longer hid food. She no longer flinched when someone moved too fast. She sat at the kitchen island, helping her grandmother Catherine bake cookies. Gina sat on the veranda, a glass of iced tea in her hand. Her mind was clear. The chemical fog was a distant nightmare. Beside her sat Eris Thorne. The firm is doing well, Gina, Eris said, looking at the architectural plans spread out on her lap. Marcus and Eleanor say the new contract for the downtown revitalization is yours. It's not just mine, Eris, Gina smiled, taking his hand. It's for the girls. Their legacy won't be Sterling's lies. It'll be what we build from here. Eleanor Riggs walked onto the porch, a newspaper in her hand. The headline read, Sterling Vance sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. He tried to appeal, Eleanor said, sitting down. The judge laughed at him. He's losing his law license tomorrow. Gina looked out at her garden, where Sophie and Ruby were chasing a golden retriever through the grass. He thought he could bury me, Gina whispered. Eris squeezed her hand. He didn't know you were a seed, Gina. Gina Vance, the matriarch, the iron gavel, the mother, took a deep breath of the warm Georgia air. The war was over. The fire had burned away the lies, leaving only the truth, and the truth was a marrow that would never break.